Hello, everyone. Happy December, shockingly. And welcome to our AC Connect, our last of 2020. Definitely not the last ever, but the last of 2020. So we're happy you joined us this evening to listen to our guest speaker and to share information. We have some AC updates. I guess I should tell you who I am, shouldn't I? Yeah. I always forget. I'm Leah, and in Calgary, and part of the Alberta Early Learning Leaders Caucus, and I am happy to join you today with my co-host.
Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know, my name is Lisa, and I'm one of the board members of AC. And we're so happy to have you here today. I know, Leah, it's been a crazy year, and I can't believe we're at December and all the things that have happened, but so glad that we have been able to spend many sessions with you, and we really look forward to where the Connect sessions are going and the guest speakers that we have. And I know we're in for a treat tonight with Jane for sure.
So the usual technology updates. This will be recorded so that we can make it available on the AC website to those who couldn't make it this evening. We're hoping to have time for questions at the end. So you can, as always, use the question box to put them in there, and then we can read them out when we have time for that. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the hand up function. It should just be in your little menu box on the right side of your screen. And then when Laura will facilitate that once we get to the question and answer. So when she calls on you, we'll unmute you on our end, and then you also have to unmute yourself on the other end. And the question box is always an option. So that's sort of the technical details, pretty much the same as always. Can you go to awesome, thank you. So yeah, you can skip ahead. This one's just the yay, look who we are. And again, we like to just put this one out here so that everybody kind of knows why we're here. This session in particular is really focused on sharing some information from some of the really good research and policy work that's being done in Alberta. So that's why we've invited Jane to come. So we will want to hear from you about what's happening and what's important to you. Some of that will look like the question and answer at the end, and some of that will be your questions and comments that you put into the question box. We do keep those after the session and look through that to see what's coming up and what might need addressing. So don't be afraid to put those questions and comments into there, even if you don't have an opportunity to share out loud. So yeah, and we have some, I guess, AC updates in general, in the field updates. And that basically is going to be this first little chunk of our agenda, and then we will turn it over to our guest speaker, Jane. So we'll just go through a couple of the updates. Do you want to talk about this one, Lisa? You're a little closer to home for you.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this one. So on our last session, we tried to premiere some of our new videos. Technology wasn't on our side, but they did launch, and we are so excited to see the response from everybody. And we also have the new website launch, the 3 different portals. So this is a screenshot of the website. If you haven't had a chance to go take a look at it, I strongly suggest you do. There are some great resources on there. There's quick links to advocacy letters that you could use either yourself, encourage your families to use them, your friends, your neighbors, whoever. There's a space for everybody now on ACE's website. And really, there's some really neat PDFs, and we designed those so that they could be shared with families, with, again, your neighbors, your colleagues. If you wanted to print them off and have them a hard copy, you're more than welcome to do that too. And just share away, because some really, really good evidence-based information is there that truly advocates for the wonderful work that we do. So if you haven't had a chance, make sure you go and check out the new website portals and the videos. We're very, very excited about those. Then I think maybe the next slide here, Laura.
So this, many of you will probably have heard about. This is the federal announcement that came last week around the budget and everything. So we just wanted to highlight a little bit about that. So there was this federal announcement about a national childcare plan. So we heard rumblings about that in the throne speech, and now they've added a little bit more detail about it. Exactly how this is going to roll out, nobody really knows. I do know that Dawn and the Canadian Childcare Federation are, looking to be as involved as possible and trying to get more information. So hopefully we'll kind of know what's coming. It fell into two pieces, the announcement that came last week. So the first one, and the one that really aligns with the work that we've been doing in Alberta, is around the federal government really recognizing that the ELCC workforce is the bedrock of establishing any kind of system and quality within Canada. So the government is committing $420 million annually, which is in addition to the bilateral funding that we already get, to support retention, training, and recruitment in the ELCC workforce. So they were very clear, and Minister Houston was very clear about the time for just making spaces is past. We need to think bigger than that and really think about the workforce and a quality system rather than just sort of, having willy-nilly spaces and crossing our fingers. So there's going to be money that will be transferred to provinces and territories, and it will be earmarked specifically for this workforce development side of things. So what that looks like, we don't exactly know. So we'll have to wait and see how those sort of funding agreements are negotiated and laid out. The second portion of that initial announcement was around the creation of a secretariat and then sort of a joint table for everybody to have these conversations. So a joint table between the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to facilitate these ELCC conversations, and that creation of a childcare secretariat, which has been in the conversation various times over the years, but hopefully this will be coming. And it was a promise that this government made in their platform, so we'll see if that happens. So these two things, we are anxiously awaiting more news on how this will roll out, because it really means that all of the research and policy work that's been happening across the country really maybe is starting to make an impact, that we need to think about this more broadly than just let's make sure there's enough 3 by 3 meter squared spaces for children to be housed in every day. So yeah.
And Leah,
what it means for Alberta, we don't have specific details on that. That I think is the next slide, Laura, if you want to swap it. Yeah. So we're expecting funding in the new year, and AECEA's goal now is really working on presenting some priorities to our government in Alberta that will really support us to attain this vision of a well-respected and well-compensated and well-educated ELCC workforce in Alberta. So like I said, this announcement from the federal government really aligns with the work that AECEA is really dedicated to, and other organizations, as evidenced by the fact that we have Jane here, who was commissioned by, I'm going to say it wrong, but I think the Edmonton
Council for Early Learning and Care. And
thank you. Okay, it's like it's a council and there's care, and I don't remember the rest. So yeah, but lots of work has been happening on that. So yeah, so we're really excited about this in particular, for sure.
And what a great opportunity.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry, Leah. I was going to say what a great opportunity this is. Finally we are hearing this stuff happening in the news, and it's on. I know the evening news for myself. We don't have to go digging too far to hear about. So it's on people's minds. It's on agendas, and what an opportunity to take the advocacy work now. And it's not something that's happening behind the scenes anymore. It is truly something that we could have power with when we bring our advocacy work forward. And like Leah did mention, AECEA is working on making some of those recommendations as well, as to how that funding will be spent. And so the more advocacy, the more that we can stand together and really show the need for a system. And like I'm sure we'll have much more information and the importance of that after tonight as well. I do encourage you to go on the website and use those advocacy letters, because now truly is the time and everybody has an opportunity to make a difference and to really get this profession put on the map.
Mhm. And we just want to give a little shout out and hello to, there's a few people joining us from out of province today, which is really exciting. This really is a unique opportunity to sort of all share in this work that Jane and the Edmonton Council has done. And it's really, I mean, I think now in particular, like Lisa was saying, to see how all of our sort of small waves are starting to lift everybody's boat as we get through this. So thanks to everyone again for joining us and for continuing to sort of use this platform as a way to connect to one another. And thanks to those people who maybe haven't joined before, and to those of you from out of the province for joining us.
Yes, and now, Leah, before we hop on over to Jane, I had one more thing I wanted to share. I'm really excited about AECEA's conference this year. I will leave it at that. We are planning something new and exciting, so keep your eyes out for the save the date card. Hopefully we'll get it out either end of December, beginning of January, and it's going to be a new twist, and I really think that you're going to enjoy it. So keep an eye out for that.
Exciting, thank you. All right, and now we are so pleased to welcome Jane Beach to share with us the highlights of this very intensive research and paper and writing that happened. And I will turn it over to you, Jane, to tell us about you and go for it.
Okay, well, thanks so much. And thanks to AECEA for the invitation, and for all of those of you that are listening in, thanks for your interest. So while I'm here to talk about the paper, which has just come out, I believe, last week on the Muttart Foundation website, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what's in it. I do have a lot of slides that I'm going to, unfortunately, have to ask Laura to manage them for me, since we had a little technical glitch, but I'm just going to go through them really quickly and then hopefully bring you to a different place of discussion. This initially paper was supposed to look at the regulation.
Jane,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Just when you're shuffling your papers around like that, people can hear it as background noise. So just as a note, if we could.
Thank you very much. I'm a very fidgety person, so I'll sit on my hands.
Thanks, Jane.
So the Muttart Foundation and the Edmonton Council approached me early last summer, or late spring, to look at the regulations in anticipation of the regulatory review that did take place. But since the consultation took place very rapidly, I was asked to explore what other ways, like what other measures the governments have to ensure quality is there. So it looks at a lot more than regulation. And while it focuses on Alberta, I also look at 4 other jurisdictions. I couldn't really do comparisons with all 13. So took a look at British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island as well for some of the features, to see how does Alberta compare in some of these areas. So in this short time, this is what I'm hopefully going to cover. So status of what's going on in Alberta right now. What does it look like? What might we learn from a whole body of research that's been done internationally? And I did it. So I'm hoping this very quick overview of some key features will pique your interest, and you might want to actually go to the Muttart Foundation website and look at the whole paper, because it's long and involved, and I'm only touching on a few things. So there is a case study of how the system was built in Norway. I had the opportunity to go and spend some time there last year, and I definitely had my eyes opened to a completely different way of approaching early learning and childcare. And then thirdly, to talk about building a quality system, not just having quality programs, because if you are going to have them as a matter of course, you really have to have a quality system. And so what kinds of things does the sector perhaps need to be asking? So let's zip through these slides. So if you can go to the next one, Laura. So just what does Alberta have to say about early learning and childcare? So this is the current sort of statement of purpose and values that is in the revised version of the bilateral agreements. You probably all are aware that every province and territory except Quebec has entered into a bilateral agreement with the federal government and has identified areas in which it's going to focus. So Alberta does believe that, you know, accessible, affordable, quality childcare is essential, and that it supports the labor force, that women's equality, social integration, poverty and poverty reduction, inclusion of newcomers, and all aspects of social and economic growth. That it's very important for children as well. So it's not just about the parent, it's about the child as well. So Alberta did revise its previous bilateral agreement that was negotiated under the previous administration. And so a number of changes have taken place. Okay, Laura, next one. Oh, I think there should be, okay, sorry. No, you're right, go ahead. I'm not managing these myself, not always in the right order. So one of the things as we go through what Alberta is doing and what things look like, I really want to focus on the fact that if we're going to have a quality childcare system, we need transformational change, that we no longer can just do bits and pieces of a little bit of extra money here for subsidies, you know, a little bit of money for wages here. What we really need is to focus simultaneously on affordability, availability, and quality. So whether it's, you know, through expansion, how the financing works, and what quality provisions are in place, but it needs to be built on a foundation that sets a vision and has a policy framework where there are targets and timetables. And while regulation, monitoring, and enforcement are an essential part, they're a very small part of the overall transformation that is needed. And quite often, I was glad to hear, I forget who mentioned it earlier, that the minister in Ottawa is no longer just talking about creating spaces, which is what typically is what governments do. We're going to expand by X number of spaces. And when you only focus on that and not on the other things, you know, your three-legged stool just falls over, because a space can be there, but if somebody can't afford it, or if it's not conveniently located, or if it's not funded adequately, if the workforce isn't there to support it, it doesn't help anybody. And, you know, is it of high quality? Is it sustainable? All of those questions need to be addressed at the same time as you are creating those spaces. So this hopefully will lead you to transformational change. So let's just take a quick, very skim through, how do things look in Alberta today? Okay, next slide. So you can see over the years, just took the last 13 years, you can see there's been steady growth, especially in center-based childcare. So that's a good thing. Okay, next slide. And when we look at how much childcare we have, so even though there's been a steady increase, that dark bar is Alberta. So you can see, compared to all the other jurisdictions, Alberta's in the kind of lower end of supply in terms of what percentage of children under the age of 12 have access to a licensed or approved space. Okay, next slide. So when we look at the money, the spending, again, you can see significant increases in funding. It flattened out there in a couple of time points, but generally significant increases in funding. So that's a good thing. Okay, next slide. However, when you look at the growth and you look at what does that mean in terms of the spending per regulated space? So if you look at the blue line, that is, you'll see a pretty steady increase in the number of spaces, but it has outpaced the funding that goes along with that. So the orange line shows what the spending per regulated space is, and you can see it's a much bumpier road, and in the last few years, the spaces have increased at a greater rate than the spending. So Alberta is actually now spending less per regulated space than it was 3 years ago. Okay, next slide, please. So when we look across provinces, you can see that orange line, what's the average provincial spending per regulated childcare space. The average is $3,405, and Alberta is about $1,000 a space less than that. And it again is in the kind of the lower quadrant, if you will, of spending per space. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about all that funding and what does that mean when it comes to the cost. And one of the things that Alberta did change recently was, I'm sure you all know, it increased the amount for fee subsidies. However, the amount that fully subsidized parents have to pay in Alberta is still quite high because there is no cap on fees, as there are in some other provinces. So if you look at the infant costs on the left-hand side, you see that the median fee in Calgary is $1,300 and in Edmonton it's $1,075. But if you look at that blue bar, a fully subsidized parent is still paying $559 a month in Calgary and $334 in Edmonton. And you'll see a similar pattern for older children, that subsidized parents, even though they're getting more money, they're still having to pay a significant amount. Okay, next slide. So when we compare the fees across the big cities and the 5 jurisdictions that were looked at, you can see that the actual cost, those first two, Calgary and Edmonton, they're on the higher side, but what is really notable is the 2 bars on the right side, the blue and the green bar, which represent Charlottetown and Winnipeg, where there is a maximum fee that's allowed to be charged in funded centers. You see the cost to parents is much lower. The full fee is regulated, so it's much lower. Okay, next slide. And so when you look at different income levels and what do parents have to pay in these various cities, so you can see when you get up, the yellow bar is Edmonton and the blue bar is Calgary. So you can see that once you're past a modest income level, you're paying a significantly more amount in those 2 cities than you are in any of the others. Okay, next slide. So I'm quickly going to go through a few provincial initiatives just so you can know what it's like in other provinces outside of Alberta. So just speaking of the other 4 that I looked at, Manitoba and PEI, they have maximum parent fees. So for example, in Manitoba, you can't charge more than $18.80 a day for a preschool age child. It's a little higher in PEI. That all of early learning and childcare in Prince Edward Island is publicly managed. So there's planning, there's formula-based funding for their early years centers, and a lot of conditions that go along with that. I guess now time is blurring together, isn't it? I guess it's closer to 2 years ago now, BC implemented a fee reduction initiative where all eligible centers got funding to reduce their fees by up to $300 a month for infant and toddler care. And the affordable childcare benefit, which has replaced their subsidy system, and so you can still get reduced fees on top of the fee reduction initiative. If you can make up to about $115,000 a year and still get some fee relief. A number of provinces, PEI and Ontario, have already undertaken workforce strategies. BC is in the process of doing that. And Manitoba had an early learning and childcare commission that took place in 2015-16, which looked at the workforce, but looked at the whole system and recommended very sort of significant system changes. Okay, next slide. So looking at regulations, because this is where this paper started. So just for comparison's sake, Manitoba requires 2/3 of staff to have at least one in each group with a 2-year diploma. Ontario requires 1 per group to have a 2-year diploma. In infant and toddler care for children under 3, BC requires in every group 1 to have a diploma, which a 2-year diploma, or a post-basic infant toddler certificate. So that's additional training beyond the basic 1-year certificate. And a second person has to have a 1-year certificate. And then you may also have 1 assistant. Ontario has a College of AECEA that regulates the profession. It's the only one of its kind in Canada. BC requires the certification to be renewed every 5 years, and there are requirements for a certain number of hours of professional development in that time in order to renew, and some other conditions. Manitoba requires everybody to have an inclusion policy. All the funded centers in PEI must take any child that comes their way. They have what they call a 0 reject policy, and there are the supports to ensure that all children can be, can take advantage fully of the program. Ontario requires individualized plans for all children with special needs, and BC requires the physical environment and the program to be modified where necessary to accommodate children that have additional support needs. And there is a part of the certification, there is a classification of special needs educator. Alberta is silent on children with additional support needs in regulation. It doesn't cover it at all, so that's one area might want to be looked at. Okay, next slide. There also, the other provinces that I looked at all have some form of ongoing advisory body to work with government, a stakeholder body of some kind. In BC, it's in regulation, the Provincial Childcare Council that meets regularly to provide advice to government. Manitoba has an early learning consultation table. Ontario has a cross-sectoral early years in childcare advisory group, but also most municipalities also have some type of advisory body because they have a mandated role in early learning and childcare in Ontario. PEI has an early years advisory committee. That, these all are varied stakeholders to give ongoing input and advice to government. And Alberta is the only one of these jurisdictions that doesn't have such a body. Okay, next. So let's look beyond our borders a little bit because so much work has been done internationally. These are just a few of the aspects that I looked at in the report. I don't have time to cover them all tonight, but going back to the UN Convention, the European Commission has done a lot of work, the OECD, of which Canada is a member. I highly recommend that everybody look at their AECEA website, all kinds of great research and information. UNICEF has developed benchmarks for quality, and then there are these things called the Barcelona Objectives and Targets to setting targets for participation. So I'm going to just very quickly look at a couple. So next slide. So the European Commission Childcare Network on Quality Targets, quite a mouthful. These are quite old. They were developed in 1996, but really have stood in good stead over the years. And they make a number of assumptions that I think are really important when we think about quality systems. So first of all, quality is a relative concept. It's not something that you can tick a box and you've got it and phew, we've got quality, let's move on. That it's based on values and beliefs and just having ongoing discussion about quality and what it should look like and how you get it. Just the discussion itself is really important and needs to be ongoing. It's valuable in its own right. And that the process of doing that should be participatory and democratic, and you involve parents and children where it's appropriate, as well as professionals working in the services, and that recognizing that the needs and perspectives and values may differ. What might be important for parents to be considered quality could be really different from what educators think quality is, and the experience for children might be different again. So all of those perspectives need to be considered. and that it's a continuing process and you never reach a final objective statement on quality. So I think those are important considerations. And next, so they have 40 targets. I'm not going to talk about them all, but I do want to just touch on a couple in the next slide that are that you can regulate. So their targets are at least 60% of staff with a 3-year post-secondary education in early learning and childcare. I wanted to talk about the physical requirements because the outdoor physical requirements in Alberta, I think that is one area of weakness in the regulation. And so they recommend, especially for the outdoors, of at least 6 square meters per child. In Alberta, for infants, it's 2 square meters per child for half the number of licensed spaces. So, you know, it's just a fraction of what the international recommendations are. And that in addition to the indoor space of 6 square meters per child for younger children and 4 for older children, there should be no recognition for internal space for adult use, staff room and things of that nature. Okay, but definitely worth looking at their targets, and they're outlined in the report. Okay, the next one is from the OECD. They did a review of 20 countries, and they came up with a series of 8 policy lessons that have, again, stood the test of time. So I'm not going to go through them all, but this is all about a system, and that wherever childcare is housed, it should have a strong and equal partnership with education. A universal approach is what's needed. Appropriate training and working conditions and compensation for staff. Data collection and monitoring and evaluation are all really important, and you need a long-term agenda. You know, one of the drawbacks in Canada is generally provinces and territories fund their childcare systems for a 4-year term in office. And then when there's a new party that comes into power, oh, no, it's all undone for the most part and start again. So a long-term agenda for moving forward is really important. Okay, next slide. So another thing that the OECD has come out with a quality toolbox, and it's also called Starting Strong 3, and they identify 5 policy levers that they say can really improve quality. So setting out goals, having strong regulations, good curriculum and standards, looking at qualifications, training and working conditions, engaging your family and community stakeholders, and advancing data collection, research, and monitoring. A number of countries have chosen one policy lever to work on over a 1-year or 2-year period and then write a country report about it. And there are a number of those on the OECD website, which are really informative. Okay, next slide. So looking at all the countries that do have high quality and universal childcare, there are a number of common characteristics, even though they're achieved differently. So when you're thinking about systems that have worked, childcare has always been part of a larger set of social, economic, and educational supports. It doesn't stand alone. So it's linked in with maternity and parental leaves and family benefits. These countries generally have low poverty rates and have addressed through transfer payments to ensure that families get supports they need. Plans are done for the long term, not for a 4-year term in office. It's a legal entitlement in a number of countries, including Norway, which I'm going to touch on in a moment. Not all, but half or more of the services are publicly delivered, including family childcare, generally by local government, like a municipality. There is always some form of a cap on parent fees, whether it's an absolute cap where it's a maximum percentage of income or a maximum amount of the total cost that parents have to pay. But affordability is defined and it's managed. And then in those countries, the use of informal care is very low, 10% or less. And I think that's really important because parent choice is always used as an argument against putting more into regulated childcare. But when parents have real choice, they tend to choose regulated care. Okay, next slide. And when it comes to staffing, increasingly the bachelor degree requirements for educators for some of the staff is increasing. The other thing that I think is really important is around working conditions and burnout that happens among educators when 8 hours a day, you know, they're on the floor directly engaged with children with very little break time or time to think, time to plan, time to meet with parents. The average, what they refer to as contact time across the OECD countries, was 4 to 6 hours, and I think it was 17 of the 25 countries. The majority of staff and families, family childcare providers are municipal employees, you know, referencing my earlier point about half or more being publicly delivered. There are common wages, so there are often wage scales that everybody gets the same based on education and years of experience, and there's often legislative support for continuous learning. The other thing that most of these countries have are designated roles. So somebody who's an assistant with maybe just an orientation type training will not be doing the same job as the educator with a 3-year you know, bachelor degree. So they're more defined roles. So let's move on to Alberta, back to Alberta. Oh, sorry. Just very quickly, just using the example of Norway. So it's a legislated entitlement in Norway. More than 90% of children from the age of 1 are enrolled. They refer to childcare as kindergarten, so that's what it's called. They have a maximum parent fee, which works out to about $400 a month, but reduced fees for siblings and a maximum of 6% of household income. So if 6% of your household income is less than, or works out to less than $400 a month per child, you will pay less. And then for many households, there's some amount of free provision for children 3 to 5 years old. And, you know, it's not like just very low income families. It's families earning less than about 90,000 Canadian dollars a year. And there's clearly a work-life balance. There are a lot of, for example, everybody's legally entitled to 3 days off work to transition their child from home to childcare. You're entitled to 10 paid days, each parent, of work paid time a year if your child is ill, has a doctor's appointment, you know, whatever your family need is. Okay, next slide. And then looking at staffing in Norway. So there's a bachelor degree for their teachers or pedagogical leaders, and then they have another level referred to as skilled workers, which are pretty much equivalent to our 2-year diploma. There are no tuition fees for post-secondary education, so it's much easier. So cost is not a barrier, at least. And then all staff have a right to belong to a union. A center doesn't have to be unionized, but the individual has a right to belong, depending on whether they're considered a skilled worker or a pedagogical leader. They'll belong to one of 2 different unions. And very comparable wages across the country. And for a kindergarten teacher, it's depending on your years of experience, roughly between $50,000 to $86,000 a year. So fairly well compensated. And there are these defined roles for people in various positions. Okay, next. Just to point out that their regulation is nothing like the way we regulate childcare in Canada. It's much more like a curriculum framework, and everything stems from the rights of the child. It's all about safeguarding the intrinsic value of childhood, that children have a right to have, you know, democratically participate and have a say in their program. And I just love this line: children shall learn to look after themselves, each other, and nature. And you see that in all the programs that you visit, that's just really alive there. Okay, next slide. See, I need to speed up a little bit here. So in Norway, there's support across all political parties. So when the party in power changes, the commitment to childcare has not changed since it became a universal entitlement more than 10 years ago. And very high societal support, very high labor force participation of women. There's no sense that, this isn't a good thing for children, and this isn't where, you know, they should be. There's core sustained funding for all programs, constant reflection and evaluation of what they're doing. They have these, you know, formal mechanisms for multi-stakeholder engagement. Every center must have a parent and a staff body that approves the budget and sort of sets the goals for the program each year. Very well qualified educators. It's available and affordable for all, and it ensures access through effective governance and funding. And so not only is it just there for you, but they make sure they actually do outreach to underserved populations such as newcomers or more vulnerable families to ensure they know about it, what it's about, that it's available for them, and how to access it. Okay, so let's get back to regulation in Alberta. And so having looked through your regulations, and you know, I'm not sure exactly what will be changed. There certainly are some areas that things could be looked at. So one is, right now you only require half the staff to have first aid. You know, it's not hard to have all staff require first aid. Consider having a minimum number of years of experience after certification as a child development supervisor before you can become a director. So you have, at least you have some experience. Require certificates to be renewed, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, and require completion of some amount of professional learning to ensure that there is ongoing learning and you know, recertification, I think is quite valuable. I think it would be worth looking at requiring all staff to at least have completed the required orientation program and have applied for certification before being employed, rather than having 6 months to have that process, especially if you hop around from job to job. You know, having that, I think, would help a little bit with quality. And then requiring at least one staff per group to be certified as a child development worker. Right now it's 1 in 3, but it has nothing to do with the group. It's only at a center level. So you can well have, you know, whole roomfuls of kids with no trained staff in it at all, or no qualified staff. Look at different ways of upskilling, I think is the term that's being used these days, of people that are an assistant level, so they may stay employed and, you know, gain the qualifications they need to become. I understand the language may change, but just for now, child development worker, child development supervisor. And then, you know, over time, I think having one person with at least a 2-year diploma and certified as a child development supervisor would help. And to review the equivalencies that are there at the moment, and also the ratios. The ratios are comparable to other provinces, but Alberta has lower educational requirements than many other provinces. And so you kind of have to look at them together. You know, having a group of, you know, 1-to-4 ratio might be fine if one of those, you know, within your room, you've got qualified staff, but if you don't, then it's a different thing. Alberta is also the only province that changes the ratio during nap time. And so I think that's something else to maybe consider. Does it mean that, you know, preschool age children are being overly encouraged to stay on their mats or stay napping in order to meet that? So that's on staffing. A couple of other areas. Next slide. So the square footage requirements, especially for infants, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about, well, this is going to prevent centers from, you know, getting started, especially in downtown areas where there's just not enough outdoor play space. But we don't say the same things about schools. We don't allow schools to develop in strip malls where, you know, you walk a group of children to a park that's, and parks, don't get me wrong, I think they're really an important, green space is really important outside of a play space, but the absolute minimum requirements, and there's nothing in regulation or policy that I can see that talks about what that space should look like. I have been kind of shocked in Calgary in particular to see outdoor play spaces with just black elasticrete and a little tiny space with no green space, no varied surfaces. And there's so much literature and research done on the outdoor environment, children's exposure to nature, and time that children spend outdoors. And if you cannot see the outdoor space, research says you're not outside, like you're out there 50% less time. And interestingly, in Norway, the guideline is the outdoor space should be 6 times as large as the indoor space, and children should have access to the forest, even if they're living in downtown Oslo. So, I do think the outdoor space is an issue, and that there needs to be appropriate support and provision for children with additional support needs in regulation. And I would recommend considering mandating the use of the flight curriculum, because having a curriculum and engaging educators in that work really will do a lot to improve quality. Okay, next. I see a better speed up here. So I just want to talk about system building, because that's the way I think you really improve quality and ensure that it's not up to an individual center or only a set of regulations. So just some assumptions if you're thinking about a system. That policy and funding are the main drivers of what's affordable, what's available, and what the quality is like. If you don't pay your workforce well enough, you're not going to have quality. But if there's no funding to support the workforce, then it's not affordable for families to use. So you really need strong public funding. You need to have system level goals and targets to set, because otherwise you don't know if you're making any progress towards your goals. You have to, the workforce is central to quality, and you have to have a well compensated, qualified and skilled workforce. A common curriculum framework really helps support quality and ensure some level of consistency and a way of engaging educators in ongoing professional learning. Universal rather than targeted approaches, even though some either populations or children need additional supports, but a universal approach. It's got to be affordable. Affordability is rarely defined. If you look in the paper, there are a number of descriptions of different ways of defining affordability, and that recognizing that you can't suddenly become Sweden or Norway, you have to start with where you are, and that it does take time. There's no magic bullet. It takes, time over a number of years. And I think we'll just have to skip very quickly through my last remaining slides. So I've proposed in this report that there needs to be ongoing debate and discussion. This report wasn't commissioned by government, so there are no recommendations to government. It's really aimed at the sector to start engaging in discussion amongst itself, among its, its members and various stakeholders. So it outlines a series of values and principles, gives examples that that's your starting point. There are a number of questions to start debate out in the communities, and then it identifies 6 objectives that you might want to consider to advance quality provision. So just examples of principles, there's a lot more detail in them, but just as examples, you center on the best interest and the rights of children. That needs to take precedence over just about everything else. Whatever you do needs to be evidence-based and not, there's a lot of good research that, and it's evolving. So whatever you're doing, it's not static, but based on the best evidence of the day, that it's equitably available to all families. So, you shouldn't have to be a wealthy family or, a family that lives in a downtown urban area in order to access early learning and childcare, and that it needs to be responsive to the needs of diverse families. So whether that's a family with a child with additional support needs, a newcomer, a low-income family, that those differences and similarities need to be taken into account. Needs to be coordinated and partnership-driven, that it's not happening without consultation with key stakeholders, whether they be parents or professionals in the sector. It has to be sustainable and it has to be accountable. So not only do centers and day home agencies need to be accountable for government funding, government needs to be accountable to the communities as well for how they're allocating funds. Okay, next slide. So here are some questions that I think, again, if you look in the report, there's a lot more detail under each question, but things like you often don't think about, how do the services get there? Like, who's responsible to make it happen? Right now, it's either parent groups, nonprofit organizations, individuals, small businesses, or large corporate chains, and they get to decide when they open or close. So is that a sustainable, way to ensure access for everybody? Who pays and how? And how facilities and homes get their money is just as important as how much they get. So if it's done through fee subsidies versus funding the system, funding the system is much more sustainable. So who gets to use early learning and childcare, and what are the barriers to access? There are lots of barriers, whether it's cost or location or, the approach of the program, but what can be done to reduce those barriers? So who are the staff? What supports do they have and need, and how does that happen? And then what data are currently collected and how are they used? Like, a lot of data is collected, but often it's never used to advance quality. Okay, next. And I think this is the last slide. So I've proposed 6 objectives to advance quality provision. So first of all, I think you have to have a policy framework to guide the development. It's got to be comprehensive and coherent, and you have to address, the main elements of quality simultaneously, and that includes availability and affordability and access. Then to develop a qualified, competent, and stable workforce through a comprehensive workforce strategy. You cannot expand childcare without a qualified workforce. You're not going to have quality childcare without a qualified, competent workforce. You're not going to have a workforce that is competent and qualified if they're not fairly paid and they have decent working conditions. So a comprehensive strategy of how that can happen is really important. And then developing targets for children's participation. I think children's participation is a much more valuable measure than how many spaces you have. I understand in Alberta, a lot of the spaces are not full, and yet I'm not sure that a lot of examination is going on as to why that is the case. Is it because it's not needed? Doubtful. Is it because people can't afford it? Possibly. Is it because the quality is not very good? Is it because people can't get there? So the space might be there, but looking at how many children are actually participating, I think is a better measure. And the 4th objective, to support and enhance program quality and childcare provision, and things like having a curriculum framework that everybody is familiar with and there's ongoing discourse about it. To support opportunities for parental involvement. So just like in the school system, the schools will still operate without that involvement, but there are opportunities for parents who want to participate and be more involved, and that should be the same in early learning and childcare. And to have a data and research agenda, so you're able to collect the data you need to see how much progress you're making towards your objectives. Okay, last slide. So the conclusions and next steps. So early learning and childcare is complex, and the strategies to build a system are complex, they're interrelated, and they're multi-pronged. So it's a process, it's a journey, there's no quick fix, and there's no perfect system. So government is the one that sets a direction and identifies priority for investment, and the degree to which they involve stakeholders in the process has an impact on the ability to reach common ground and move an agenda forward. If everybody's battling the government all the time, and they're in a sort of reactive position all the time instead of working collaboratively. It's a much longer journey. So some kind of formal consultation process and vehicle would be really helpful. And an immediate step that the sector can take is to form strategic relationships with not only yourselves and educators, but other representatives, of equity-seeking groups, women's organizations, foundations, education, labor, Indigenous groups, disability organizations, and local government. So a really broad-based group of stakeholders to start building consensus on these issues. And next slide. So I think I've just already said this. No quick fix. You need a knowledgeable, enough knowledgeable policymakers in government to really advance it and to work with other stakeholders, political commitment, and that high quality is an essential part of the social infrastructure, and it is needed now more than ever in these COVID times, and women being disproportionately negatively impacted by the pandemic. And so I'll be happy to take questions in the 4 minutes we have left. Or I'm happy to stay on the line if anybody has further questions beyond 4 minutes. So I'm not sure what happens next. You'll have to.
So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the hand up and Laura will call on you and unmute you. If you'd like to put your question into the question box, you can do that as well, and we can read them out from there. Yeah, and we welcome your feedback and your thoughts or anything you want clarification on.
Thank you so much, Jane. I'm going to preemptively say the same thing with every AC Connect that we do. My apologies if I mispronounce your name. So I have one person with their hand up. Savandra Kamanthudua. I apologize for that pronunciation. You've been unmuted if you have a question or comment to make.
Hi. So my question is, in Alberta, where can you go to get an ECE degree? I just completed my diploma, but I can't find an online course, or well, I need to do online. I'm a single mom, but where they have a degree for ECE educators.
I'm not the best person. I'll turn that over to somebody else. Are there, like, does Grant MacEwan have a degree program at this point, or?
Mount Royal University in Calgary has a degree program.
Okay.
As does MacEwan now.
Yeah.
But both are in person. For online, you'd have to look out of province right now. I think the most popular that I've seen is doing it through University of Victoria.
Yeah.
In their they do
child and youth. Yeah.
Yeah, child and youth degree. So that's the main one that I see educators doing if they need online learning right now.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay. And Sherry Gao, you've been unmuted if you have a question or comment to make.
Hi, ladies. Thank you, Jane, for presenting. I've got 5 or 6 pages here that I quickly wrote down. I'm currently in my 3rd year at Grant Mac, working towards my degree. And to the lady that asked the question before, it's all online because of COVID. So you can take it from your home, or you could be anywhere in the world and take it online. So I encourage you to look into that. I have a question for Jane. My twin sister and I own and operate 7 out-of-school cares and 3 preschools in the Edmonton area. we're very, what's the proper word to use here? We tell our staff that we're women supporting women. We pay our staff higher wages. So what I'm looking is to you for some advice is small, simple steps to take towards getting our staff educated and moving towards a more qualified staff.
Well, ideally, what would happen is one of the post-secondary institutions would develop what's called a workplace training model. It's been used for a number of years in Manitoba. It was used a number of years ago in Ontario, in Prince Edward Island, where, so for example, in Manitoba, if you have been an assistant for 2 years, so you need to have 2 years experience, then you can enroll in the program. You spend, it's either 2 or 3 days in your program and the rest in school, which, you know, might be on, I assume it's online at this point in time, and the government pays for substitute staff to backfill your time. And, you know, you do end up with your diploma. So I think that a number of other jurisdictions are looking at similar programs. There is a federal program called Future Skills, which some provinces are starting to access now, that you know, help cover the cost of tuition, because its purpose is to help. I don't like the term upskill, but that is the term they use, so that people don't have to leave their employment in order to get additional qualifications. And interestingly, the workplace model graduates in Manitoba have the highest retention rates of any other type of early childhood educator, because they know what they're getting themselves in for. Like, they've been working in the sector for a period of time, so they're much more purposeful in their decision to, you know, to take the training.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It sure does. My staff would like to go to school, but they also need to earn a wage.
Yeah.
And so they're unable to take a year or two and enroll in Norquest or Grant MacEwan and not be able to take care of their families. So it's been a real,
yeah.
Mhm.
There are a number of post-secondaries in other jurisdictions that do have online, you know, learning that you can get a certificate from. And with the agreement on what used to be called the Agreement on Internal Trade, it's now the Canada Free Trade Agreement, that if you know, are qualified and certified in another jurisdiction, it has to apply in your jurisdiction as well. So I know, for example, Pacific College in BC does online learning for your diploma. You know, there are quite a few. I don't exactly know in Alberta if any of them are available online. But the workplace model means you don't have to do all your learning sort of in the evenings outside of your full day of work, which I think is one reason it's so popular.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Don't have anybody else with their hands up. Just a couple of notes. Thank you, Jane, coming in through the comments here. Thank you. I love the paper and appreciate you going through it with us tonight. Here is a great supporting document on the rights of the child to play. Includes municipalities' responsibilities to create policies to ensure access to healthy outdoor environments, as you mentioned. And just some comments in regards to the post-secondary question. So there are a few colleges in Alberta that do have online courses for early learning and childcare diplomas. And sometimes you can take them part-time, but again, that kind of goes back to people doing their learning at night is not always the best thing. Speaking as somebody who's done night classes, it's very difficult. And Just trying to see. And another option, Athabasca University has a professional arts degree with major in human services. And they do take the early learning and childcare diploma credits to get a degree, although not specific to early learning and care at that point, but they do have some great resources. When AC was doing the professional development funding, that was a big one that I saw a lot of directors taking. So those were quite good.
Laura, is some of this information summarized on the AC website in terms of programs people can access for education?
So Nikki put in the link, I believe, into the chat box here for all of the current AECEA post-secondary options. So that's on there. And then it shows also, because mainly the colleges, they'll have regional bases where they'll do teaching out of as well. So you may have like Northern Lakes does one, I believe, in Peace River, I want to say. Something like that. Anyways, that is all on the website, so it'll be much more in depth than just off the top of my head if you want to take a look at that. And another suggestion in regards to getting post-diploma opportunities, MacEwan also has a Bachelor of Applied Human Services degree that you can do. So there's a lot of options available, but specific to early learning and care in Alberta, it is just MacEwan and Mount Royal right now that offer the degree program. I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay, well, if there's not any more direct questions, then we'll wrap it up for this evening. And thank you so much, Jane. That was, I mean, it was quick, but it was an amazing run through of the paper and super helpful. Honestly, I've read most, but not all of it. But it really, I mean, it really sort of, it was an amazing sort of summary and highlight and sort of giving those pointers for, look for this if you're interested in that, you know, and I think all of us will be digging into different sections of that depending on where we fit in the sector. So we really appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate all of your work, and thank you so much for being available and for staying on a little extra for questions.
Well, thanks to everybody who hung in through that rapid delivery. I hope it kept you awake enough. It was pretty fast. And thanks for inviting me, and good luck with everything going forward in these challenging times.
You too, take care, and we hope you're healthy and safe and have a lovely holiday. And
yes, you too.
Hopefully we can have some happy conversations in 2021 too.
Okay, take care.
Thanks so much, Jane. And thank you everyone for joining us, and keep an eye out for our 2021 schedule of AC Connect, and have a lovely winter break, and we'll see you all in the new year. Good night.